A millionaire abandons his twin boys in the river, thinking he's buried his darkest secret forever. But 18 years later, he gets a call that shakes him to his core. The twins didn't die that night, they survived. Now, they've returned with a plan that's been years in the making. His perfect life is about to unravel, one piece at a time. Who saved the boys? Where have they been? And what do they want now? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The city lights flickered against dark clouds as thunder rumbled in the distance. Rain pelted the empty streets, creating sheets of water that reflected the approaching storm. In his sleek black Mercedes, Victor Gray guided the steering wheel with steady hands, his expensive suit pristine despite the gloomy weather. His cold eyes stayed fixed on the winding forest road ahead, barely visible through the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers. In the back seat, 3-year-old twins Callum and Silas sat quietly, their small bodies dwarfed by their car seats. Their matching blue pajamas, decorated with tiny sailboats, were a gift from their mother. Wide-eyed, they watched raindrops race down the windows, making patterns in the darkness. Neither boy understood why their father had woken them so late or why mommy wasn't coming on their special nighttime adventure. The radio played softly, a gentle lullaby that seemed out of place in the stormy night. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word," the melody mixed with the steady thrum of rain on the roof and the swish-swish of the wipers. Callum clutched his stuffed elephant, his favorite bedtime companion. Next to him, Silas pressed his small hand against the cool window glass, tracing the path of water droplets with his finger. The car's interior felt thick with tension, though the boys were too young to name the heavy feeling in the air. Victor barely glanced at his sons in the rearview mirror. His jaw was set, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. To him, these children were a mistake, evidence of an affair that threatened everything he'd built, his tech empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed public image. All of it could crumble if anyone discovered their existence. The solution had to be permanent. The Mercedes slowed as it approached an old steel bridge spanning a deep river gorge. The structure loomed ahead, its metal bones dark against flashes of lightning. Victor pulled onto the bridge and stopped midway, putting the car in park. Rain drummed harder on the roof as thunder cracked overhead, making both boys jump. "Time for our adventure," Victor announced, his voice eerily calm as he stepped out into the downpour. He opened the back door, rainwater immediately soaking into his expensive suit. With mechanical movements, he unbuckled first Callum, then Silas, lifting them out onto the wet bridge surface. The twins huddled together, shivering in their thin pajamas. Callum's elephant slipped from his grasp, falling into a puddle. Silas reached for his brother's hand as their father retrieved a black duffel bag from the trunk. "Daddy," Callum's voice quavered, "I'm scared." Victor didn't respond. He knelt down, pulling out what looked like small ankle weights. With quick, efficient movements, he strapped them to each boy's legs, ignoring their confused whimpers and the way they tried to step back from his touch. "Stand still," he ordered sharply when Silas tried to move away. The little boy froze, tears mixing with raindrops on his cheeks. Lightning flashed again, illuminating Victor's face. There was no warmth there, no hesitation, just cold determination as he lifted first Callum, then Silas over the bridge's metal railing. The boys cried harder now, their small hands gripping his sleeves in terror. "This is for the best," Victor said flatly, looking past them to the churning water below. The river was swollen with rain, its surface broken by jutting rocks and swirling currents. Callum screamed as Victor's hands released them. The sound pierced the night, cut short as both boys plunged into the icy water. The weights dragged them down immediately, pulling them into the river's dark embrace. But fate, or perhaps simple chance, intervened. As they sank, Silas's leg kicked against a submerged branch. The impact loosened his weight, and pure survival instinct made him kick harder until it fell away completely. Through the murky water, he saw his brother struggling nearby. Callum thrashed against the current, his own weight still attached, but the river's flow pushed him toward a massive boulder, and his small hands found purchase on its rough surface. As he clung there, Silas swam to him, his tiny fingers working at the straps of Callum's weight until it, too, dropped away into the depths. Together, they fought their way to the boulder's surface, their lungs burning. They emerged, gasping, battered by rain and current, but alive. The twins dragged themselves fully onto the rock's flat top, their pajamas torn, bodies bruised, and shaking violently from cold and fear. Above them, the bridge stood empty. Their father was gone, leaving no trace except a sodden stuffed elephant caught in the rocks nearby. Its once cheerful face was now a silent witness to their survival. As their strength gave out, both boys collapsed on the hard stone. The storm began to ease, its fury spent. In the graying light of dawn, a small fishing boat appeared around the river's bend, its occupant unaware of the miracle and the tragedy that had just unfolded in these waters. The twins lay unconscious but breathing, their small hands still clasped together, having faced death and emerged from its waters with a bond that would shape the rest of their lives. The morning sun painted the river in pale gold, its light catching the lingering mist that clung to the water's surface. Lars guided his small fishing boat around the bend, his weathered hands steady on the tiller. The old motor chugged softly, sending ripples across the calm water. His faded navy tattoo, an anchor wrapped in rope, peeked out from beneath his rolled sleeve as he reached to adjust the nets trailing behind the boat. 40 years on these waters had taught Lars to read every ripple and current, but nothing in his decades of fishing had prepared him for what he saw that morning. Through the thinning fog, something caught his eye, two small forms lying motionless on a large boulder near the shoreline. Lars cut the motor, letting the boat drift closer. His heart seemed to stop as the shapes became clear, two little boys, soaked through, their matching pajamas torn and muddy. They lay curled together like sleeping puppies, but deathly still. "Dear God," Lars muttered, already moving to drop anchor. With practiced efficiency, he secured the boat and climbed onto the slippery boulder. Up close, he could see their blue-tinged lips, the scratches on their arms and faces. But when he pressed rough fingers to their necks, he found weak pulses fluttering beneath cold skin. Alive, but barely. Lars didn't waste time wondering how they'd gotten there, questions could come later. Right now, these boys needed help. He gathered them up, one in each arm, noting how light they felt, like picking up two wet sparrows. Their skin was ice-cold against his chest as he carefully made his way back to the boat. The journey to his cabin took 20 minutes, during which Lars wrapped the boys in the emergency blankets he kept aboard. Neither stirred. Their small faces remained slack, dark lashes stark against pale cheeks. Something protective and fierce awakened in Lars's chest, something he hadn't felt since his days in special operations when he'd been responsible for the lives of his team members. His cabin sat deep in the forest, half a mile from the nearest dirt road. Lars had chosen it specifically for its isolation after leaving the military. No electricity lines ran this far out, he generated his own power and drew water from a well. The perfect place to disappear or to hide someone who needed to stay hidden. Inside, Lars laid the boys on his bed, stripping off their wet clothes and wrapping them in warm, dry blankets. He built up the fire in the wood stove and put water on to boil. As he worked, his military training took over, assessing their conditions with clinical precision: severe hypothermia, early stages of frostbite on fingers and toes, multiple contusions, possible concussion. But it was their extreme thinness that worried him most. These children had been neglected long before whatever incident had left them on that rock. Their ribs showed clearly through pale skin, their faces gaunt despite baby-round cheeks. Over the next several hours, Lars monitored their temperatures, spooning warm broth between blue-tinged lips when he could. His mind kept drifting back to another time, another place, young men under his command, broken and bleeding in foreign deserts. He'd learned then how to push aside emotion to focus only on keeping people alive. But these were children, and something about their identical faces stirred memories he'd rather forget. Days passed in a blur of constant care. The boys drifted in and out of consciousness, never fully waking. Lars cleaned their wounds, wrapped their frost-nipped extremities, and coaxed nutrition into them drop by drop. He didn't leave the cabin except to check his generator and bring in more firewood. Sleep came in short bursts when exhaustion overwhelmed him. It was during these twilight moments that the boys began to speak, not awake but caught in fever dreams. Their small voices carried through the cabin's silence. "Daddy, please. Cold water. Bridge is scary." Lars listened, piecing together their fragments of memory: a father, a bridge, water in darkness. The picture forming in his mind was ugly but familiar. He'd seen enough of humanity's darkness in his years with Ops Psychological Operations Division to recognize the shape of violence, even when it wore a parent's face. When the boys finally opened their eyes, truly awake, it had been nearly 2 weeks. Lars found himself looking into identical pairs of brown eyes, heavy with confusion and fear. They huddled together in his bed, watching his every move with wary attention. "Where's Daddy?" one whispered. His brother gripped his hand tighter. "You're safe here," Lars said simply, setting bowls of warm soup on the bedside table. "That's all that matters right now." Over the following days, the twins gradually grew stronger. Lars learned their names, Callum and Silas, though he had to watch carefully to tell them apart. They spoke little, communicating mostly through looks and touches, but they began to trust him, accepting his care with increasing confidence. Lars knew he should report finding them. Child Services would want to know about 2 abandoned 3-year-olds. But something held him back. His years in ops had taught him to recognize patterns, to see the shadows behind seemingly random events. These boys hadn't been abandoned, they'd been targeted. And whoever had tried to kill them might try again if they resurfaced in the system. One night, as rain lashed against the cabin windows, the twins sat huddled on the couch while Lars stoked the fire. Thunder rolled overhead, making them jump. When he turned back to them, their faces were tight with fear. "Are you our daddy now?" Callum asked softly. Silas watched with equal intensity, waiting for the answer. Lars didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the far corner of the cabin, where a dusty footlocker sat, untouched for years. The boys watched as he pulled it out and opened it, revealing files marked with ops scops and faded military stamps. Sitting at his desk, Lars began to write, drawing on decades of tactical experience. These boys would need more than just a safe haven. They would need tools to survive whatever darkness had marked them for death. He could teach them that, not just survival skills, but how to read people, how to spot danger, how to disappear when necessary. The twins watched him work, thunder still rolling outside. They didn't understand what he was writing, but something in Lars's focused expression seemed to comfort them. They curled up together on the couch, finally drifting to sleep as the storm raged on. The morning air was crisp with early spring freshness as Lars carried an old wooden chessboard onto the cabin's front porch. Callum and Silas, now 6 years old, watched with curious eyes as their guardian carefully set up the pieces, explaining each one's name and movement pattern. "This game is life," Lars told them, his weathered hands hovering over the board. "You win by thinking ahead, not by getting angry." The twins sat cross-legged on either side of the board, their matching brown eyes studying the pieces with intense focus. Lars had noticed how their personalities had begun to diverge. Callum's gaze was calculating, while Silas observed with quiet patience. As seasons changed, the chess lessons evolved into something deeper. Lars wove strategy and survival into every game, teaching them to see 3, 5, 10 moves ahead. "Your opponent shows their plan in small ways," he would say. "Watch, learn, adapt." The training expanded beyond the chessboard. Each morning began with runs through the forest, their small feet learning to move silently over fallen leaves and broken branches. Lars taught them to read the woods, which plants could heal, which could harm, how to find north without a compass. By age 8, the twins could solve complex puzzles while Lars timed them, their minds racing against the clock. He would create scenarios, teaching them to think under pressure. Life rarely gives you time to hesitate, he reminded them. Callum showed a natural gift for words and strategy. Lars worked with him on speech patterns, teaching him how to adjust his tone and choose his words to influence others. They would practice conversations, with Lars playing different roles: angry stranger, friendly neighbor, suspicious authority figure. Callum learned to adapt his approach for each situation. Silas, more physically intuitive, excelled at movement and observation. Lars taught him to blend into shadows, to change his posture and gait to become unnoticeable. The boy learned to read body language with uncanny accuracy, picking up on the smallest tells that revealed people's true intentions. As they grew older, Lars introduced more advanced skills. By 12, they were learning basic coding and surveillance techniques. He taught them how to sweep for listening devices, how to secure communications, how to gather intelligence without being detected. The old military equipment from his ops days found new purpose as training tools. The twins developed their own silent language, a combination of subtle gestures and shared glances that allowed them to communicate without words. They worked in perfect synchronization, each complementing the other's strengths. Callum would plan, Silas would execute, and together they became something more than the sum of their parts. Through their teenage years, the training intensified. Lars pushed them harder, knowing his time was growing short. He had started coughing more frequently, carefully hiding the blood-spotted handkerchiefs from the boys. But he couldn't hide the growing weakness in his body, the way simple tasks left him winded. Still, he persevered. He taught them everything he knew about tactical deception, about creating and maintaining cover identities, about surviving in a world that might turn hostile at any moment. The twins absorbed it all, their minds and bodies becoming finely honed instruments. The lessons went beyond physical and mental skills. Lars taught them about honor, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Power without purpose is just violence, he would say. Find something worth fighting for. On their 16th birthday, Lars called them into his study. The twins entered to find 3 envelopes on his desk. Their guardian's face was grave as he handed them each a packet containing new identities, complete with passports and documentation that would withstand any scrutiny. When the river calls, Lars told them, his voice rough with emotion, be ready to answer. He didn't explain what he meant, and they didn't ask. Years of training had taught them that some questions were better left unspoken. That night, Lars went to bed early, complaining of fatigue. The twins found him the next morning, peaceful in his sleep, his weathered face finally at rest. They buried him beneath the old oak tree where they had first learned chess, marking the spot with a simple stone. No words were needed between them as they stood at the grave. 10 years of training had prepared them for this moment, but nothing could fully prepare them for the loss of the man who had saved them, raised them, and taught them how to survive in a world that had once tried to destroy them. The small-town post office smelled of dust and old paper. Callum adjusted his worn leather jacket as he approached the counter, his footsteps echoing in the nearly empty building. The elderly clerk looked up from her crossword puzzle as he slid his last forged ID across the scratched counter. Time to disappear, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. She barely glanced at the ID before processing his final piece of mail, a letter addressed to a ghost box that would never be checked. Outside, the spring air carried a hint of diesel as Callum boarded the waiting bus. His single suitcase contained everything he needed, carefully selected clothes, a high-end laptop, and the tools of his trade hidden in innocent-looking containers. As the bus pulled away, he watched the town shrink in the window, another stepping stone in a long journey. The transformation into Calderon began before the bus reached the city limits. Callum's fingers moved swiftly across his laptop keyboard, activating dormant cryptocurrency wallets and beginning the careful process of establishing his new identity. Each transaction was calculated, creating a subtle but traceable history that would withstand scrutiny. Over the next few months, Calderon emerged as a rising star in the underground financial world. He started small, making strategic trades that caught the attention of key players. His reputation grew through whispered conversations in exclusive clubs and encrypted forum posts. He understood the language of money and power, the same language that had built Victor Gray's empire. Callum's approach to infiltrating Victor's investment firm was methodical. He studied their trading patterns, identified weak points in their strategy, and positioned himself as someone with valuable insights. The firm's CFO, Marcus Chen, was his first target. Callum arranged to, accidentally, meet him at a financial conference, where he casually pointed out a market trend that saved Chen's department millions. Chen was impressed by the young analyst's sharp mind and steady demeanor. He never noticed how Callum's questions subtly guided conversations toward the firm's inner workings or how his helpful suggestions always seemed to align with the company's undisclosed needs. Within 3 months, Chen was regularly seeking Callum's advice. The final step into Victor's inner circle came after Callum orchestrated a brilliant save during a market downturn. His analysis helped the firm avoid a significant loss, and Chen personally recommended him to Victor Gray as a potential personal financial advisor. Victor's office was exactly as Callum remembered from old magazine photos, all steel and glass, designed to intimidate. But Callum had spent years preparing for this moment. He met Victor's calculating stare with calm confidence, discussing complex financial strategies with the ease of someone born to the world of high finance. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Darren," Victor said, studying Callum's resume. "Though you seem quite young for someone with such impressive insights." "I started early," Callum replied with a slight smile, his heart steady despite facing the man who had tried to kill him 18 years ago. "Money has always been my language." Victor hired him that day. While Callum moved through the world of high finance, Silas took a different path. As Sean Wells, he joined Elite Care Services, the company responsible for maintaining Victor's sprawling mansion. His interview was brief. The supervisor barely looked up from his phone as Silas demonstrated his knowledge of cleaning products and security protocols. Silas became a shadow in the mansion's halls. He worked efficiently, invisibly, just another uniformed figure moving through the background of the wealthy family's life. The other staff barely noticed him, which was exactly what he wanted. Every shift, he memorized patterns, when rooms were empty, which cameras had blind spots, how the security team rotated. Using skills learned from Lars, Silas installed tiny cameras in overlooked corners. Each device was carefully placed during his regular cleaning routine, hidden in plain sight. Through these silent observers, he learned the rhythm of the house and its inhabitants. Victor's new family was a revelation. His wife, Renee, moved through the mansion like a ghost herself, beautiful but distant. But it was their daughter, Nia, who caught Silas's attention. 17 years old, with her father's sharp features softened by something more thoughtful, she spent hours in the mansion's library. Sometimes, when Silas cleaned there, she would acknowledge him with a small nod, the only member of the household who seemed to see the staff as people. Late one night, after their respective shifts ended, the brothers connected through their secure channel. Callum sat in his modern apartment, while Silas used a burner phone from his modest room in the staff quarters. Their shared virtual chessboard glowed on their screens, a game they had been playing for weeks, each move carefully considered. Silas's message appeared in the encrypted chat, "The river has called." Callum studied the chessboard for a moment before moving his knight. His reply was equally brief, "Then we answer." The brothers had spent years preparing for this moment, building their pieces, positioning themselves on the board. Now, like the chess games Lars had taught them, it was time to begin the real play. Early morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Victor Gray's penthouse office, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Callum, now known as Calderon, straightened his Italian silk tie as he approached Victor's imposing desk. The quarterly report in his hands represented weeks of careful manipulation, numbers shifted just enough to hide certain transactions while highlighting others. "The Q3 projections are particularly promising," Callum said, sliding the leather-bound portfolio across the desk. His voice carried the precise mix of confidence and deference that Victor responded to best. I've identified several emerging markets that align perfectly with our current strategy. Victor leaned back in his chair, his silver hair catching the morning light. He flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency, nodding at the carefully crafted graphs and projections. Impressive work, Cal. Your instincts for market trends continue to exceed expectations. Callum allowed himself a modest smile, carefully suppressing the cold satisfaction that threatened to surface in his eyes. Thank you, sir. I've always believed in taking a comprehensive approach. Over the next few weeks, Callum methodically deepened his influence within Victor's organization. He began by subtly adjusting investment reports, directing small but significant portions of funds toward shell companies he had established years ago. Each transaction was carefully masked behind legitimate-looking business deals. During lunch breaks, Callum made a point of sharing coffee with Harley, Victor's longtime executive assistant. She was a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who had survived countless corporate reshuffles through her keen understanding of office politics. I couldn't help but notice some inconsistencies in Thompson's latest proposals, Callum mentioned one day, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. I'm sure it's nothing, but... Harley's eyes narrowed slightly. Thompson's always been a bit creative with his numbers. What kind of inconsistencies? Callum shared just enough details to plant seeds of doubt about the CFO's methods, knowing Harley would process the information in her own way. Within days, she began scrutinizing Thompson's reports more closely, creating exactly the kind of internal tension Callum needed. The stock panic was his masterpiece of manipulation. Callum carefully leaked a seemingly credible tip about potential problems with a major investment partner. The resulting market flutter was minor but noticeable, enough to cause concern without triggering serious investigation. Sir, Callum said, bursting into Victor's office with carefully manufactured urgency, I've identified the source of the problem, and I have a solution, but we need to act quickly. Victor's face was tense as he reviewed Callum's hastily prepared analysis. How did you catch this so fast? I've been monitoring similar patterns in Asian markets, Callum explained, pointing to charts he had prepared months ago for exactly this scenario. If we move now, we can not only prevent losses but potentially turn this to our advantage. Victor made the calls Callum suggested, and within hours, the situation was under control. The incident cemented Callum's position as Victor's most trusted financial advisor. Meanwhile, in the mansion's quiet halls, Silas went about his duties as Sean Wells with careful precision. His cleaning routine gave him perfect cover to observe the daily rhythms of Victor's family life. He paid special attention to Nia, Victor's teenage daughter, noting how she spent hours alone in the library with her tablet, coding and reading, while her father worked late and her mother attended endless charity functions. Through his hidden cameras, Silas watched Nia's interactions with her parents. Victor's rare appearances were formal and distant, focused on grades and expectations rather than emotional connection. Her mother floated through conversations like a beautiful ghost, present but never quite there. One afternoon, while cleaning the library, Silas carefully dropped a USB drive near Nia's favorite reading spot. The drive was labeled simply "Bold Photos" in smudged handwriting. He had positioned one of his micro cameras perfectly to capture her reaction when she found it. Later that day, Silas watched through the camera feed as Nia discovered the drive. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands with obvious curiosity. After a moment's hesitation, she plugged it into her tablet. Silas knew the drive contained nothing dangerous, just enough interesting data to make her want to dig deeper. The brothers maintained careful communication through their ingenious system. Late at night, when the mansion was quiet, Silas would slip into the laundry room during his cleaning rounds. Hidden behind a loose panel in an old dryer was a modified shortwave radio, its signals carefully encrypted. Miles away, in a secure deposit box that Calderon had rented, an identical radio received his messages. Victor's getting comfortable, Callum's voice crackled through the hidden radio one night. He's starting to share more sensitive information. How's our other project progressing? The seed is planted, Silas replied softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She's curious, started doing her own research, looking into old news archives. Perfect. Maintain distance. Let her curiosity do the work. These midnight conversations were brief but crucial, allowing the brothers to coordinate their increasingly complex plan while maintaining their separate covers. As weeks passed, their careful groundwork began to show results. Victor relied more and more on Callum's financial guidance, while Nia's late-night research sessions grew longer and more focused. The brothers watched and waited, each playing their part in the elaborate game they had spent years preparing for. One evening, as Silas monitored the camera feed from Victor's study, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Callum: "Initiate Phase 2. Silas glanced up at the screen, showing Victor working late at his desk, completely unaware of the forces aligning against him. He gave a silent nod, knowing that everything was about to change. The evening light faded over the city skyline as Victor sat at the head of a long mahogany table in the private dining room of LeBlanc, surrounded by his board members. Crystal glasses clinked, and quiet conversation hummed beneath the soft jazz playing overhead. Callum, standing near the entrance, held a leather portfolio close to his chest, waiting for the perfect moment. As Victor raised his glass to propose a toast about the company's recent successes, Callum approached with practiced hesitation. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but there's an urgent matter requiring your attention." Victor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly as he lowered his glass. "Can't it wait, Cal?" "It's regarding the Singapore merger," Callum said, just loud enough for nearby board members to hear. He opened his portfolio and made a show of searching through papers, his movements becoming increasingly frantic. "I had the updated figures right here." The board members exchanged glances. Someone cleared their throat. "What figures?" Victor's voice carried an edge now. "The revised projections showing the..." Callum paused, letting worry creep into his expression. "I must have left them in your office." "The ones showing the actual exposure levels." Victor's face darkened. "What exposure levels?" "The ones we discussed privately, sir." Callum's voice dropped lower, but not quite low enough to prevent others from hearing, about the potential liabilities. The room grew silent. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, while others tried to appear absorbed in their meals. Victor's knuckles whitened around his glass. "There are no such figures," Victor snapped, his voice rising. "And there are no liabilities. Is this how you handle sensitive information, by bringing up non-existent problems during a private dinner?" "Sir, I..." "Enough." Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're dismissed for the evening. We'll discuss your continued employment tomorrow." Callum bowed slightly and backed away, letting genuine fear show on his face. As he left, he heard Victor attempting to smooth things over with forced laughter, but the damage was done. The seeds of doubt had been planted. 3 days later, journalist Marina Chen received an anonymous email containing photographs that made her sit up straight in her chair. The images showed Victor at various locations over the past decade: a private airport in the Cayman Islands, a discreet meeting in a Zurich hotel lobby, handshakes with known facilitators of offshore accounts. Attached were documents suggesting a pattern of systematic tax evasion and money laundering. The SEC's audit began quietly, but its effects rippled through the company like tremors before an earthquake. Investigators requested documents, interviewed staff, and asked increasingly pointed questions about certain overseas transactions. In the midst of this growing storm, Callum worked his subtle magic with Harley. He arranged to meet her for their usual coffee, choosing a quiet corner of the building's cafe. "Have you noticed Thompson acting strange lately?" he asked, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Harley frowned. "How do you mean?" "The way he's been meeting with the SEC team without informing Victor first. And those late-night calls from his office." Callum shrugged. "Probably nothing." "What late-night calls?" "Oh, I assumed you knew. He's been here past midnight several times this week, very hush-hush about it, too." Harley's expression hardened. She had always been protective of Victor, and the idea of betrayal from a trusted colleague clearly disturbed her. "I'll look into it," she said firmly. While this drama unfolded in the office, Silas moved through the mansion like a shadow. During his cleaning rounds, he carefully placed tiny listening devices behind the heavy curtains in Victor's study and beneath the ornate headboard in the master bedroom. Each device was virtually undetectable, designed to pick up even the faintest whisper. One afternoon, while Nia was immersed in her coding work in the library, Silas deliberately dropped a crumpled receipt near her feet. He had aged it carefully, making it look worn and forgotten. The receipt was from a pawn shop, dated 1999, and in the corner, someone had scribbled Bridge Street in faded ink. Nia picked up the paper, her fingers tracing the handwritten note. Something about it caught her attention, perhaps the year or the street name that echoed with unspoken significance. She slipped it into her pocket, unaware of Silas watching through his hidden camera. Victor's composure began to crack under the mounting pressure. Dark circles appeared under his eyes as sleepless nights took their toll. He started checking his office for bugs, jumping at unexpected sounds, and second-guessing every conversation. Late one night, while reviewing security footage from the mansion, Victor noticed something odd. The timestamp on the garden camera jumped forward 3 minutes during his evening walk. It was subtle, most people wouldn't have caught it, but Victor had developed a paranoid attention to detail. He rewound the footage several times, his hands shaking slightly. Someone had tampered with his security system, but when he called the security company, they found no evidence of interference. The cameras appeared to be working perfectly, and their logs showed no unauthorized access. Victor stood in his private bathroom, gripping the marble counter as he stared at his reflection in the ornate mirror. His face looked gaunt, haunted. "Someone's watching me," he muttered, studying the shadows under his eyes. "They're always watching." His phone buzzed suddenly, making him flinch. The screen showed a blocked number. Victor's hand trembled as he answered the call. A single whisper came through, soft but clear as ice, "Remember the river." The morning sun cast long shadows through Victor's study as he paced back and forth, his expensive loafers wearing a path in the Persian rug. His hands trembled as he reached for his third cup of coffee, spilling drops on his pristine white shirt. "Victor, please," Renee pleaded from the doorway, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the frame. "You haven't slept properly in weeks. This isn't like you." "I'm fine," he snapped. But his bloodshot eyes and disheveled appearance told a different story. The usually immaculate Victor Gray looked like he was unraveling at the seams. "You need help," Renee insisted, her voice softening. "Professional help. What if someone from the board sees you like this? Think about the company, if nothing else." Victor paused his pacing, considering her words. She was right. He couldn't risk appearing unstable, not with the SEC breathing down his neck and whispers of conspiracy floating through the office corridors. Later that day, he mentioned the idea of therapy to Callum during their morning briefing. Of course, discretion would be paramount, Victor added, straightening papers on his desk that didn't need straightening. "I might know someone," Callum offered, his voice carefully measured. "Dr. Maeve Sullivan. She specializes in executive stress management and has an excellent reputation for confidentiality. Several board members from other companies use her services." The following week, Victor sat in Dr. Maeve's office, a tastefully decorated space with muted colors and comfortable leather chairs. The therapist herself was a striking woman with sharp, observant eyes that seemed to look straight through him despite her gentle demeanor. "Tell me about your sleeping patterns," she said, her voice as soft as falling snow. Many executives experience disrupted sleep when dealing with past trauma. "Trauma?" Victor scoffed. "I built my empire from nothing. Success isn't trauma." "Sometimes the river of memory flows beneath the surface," she replied, noting how his hand tightened on the armrest. "We often find gaps in our recollections, spaces where forgotten sins might hide." Session after session, Dr. Maeve wove her careful web of suggestions. She never directly mentioned the bridge or the twins, but her carefully chosen words kept drawing Victor's mind back to that rainy night in 1999. The mind protects itself, she would say, but the river of truth always finds its way to the surface. Meanwhile, Callum had orchestrated another layer of manipulation. Through careful coordination with a pharmaceutical contact, he arranged for Victor's antidepressants to be replaced with subtle compounds that induced vivid dreams and emotional instability. The effects became apparent quickly. Victor started seeing shadows in his peripheral vision, hearing whispers in empty rooms. His mood swings became more pronounced, switching from aggressive outbursts to periods of paranoid withdrawal. During one particularly tense morning, Victor accused his longtime housekeeping manager of stealing his cufflinks, a family heirloom he insisted had been on his dresser the night before. Despite the manager's protests and 20 years of loyal service, Victor fired her on the spot. The cufflinks were later found in his coat pocket, but he refused to acknowledge his mistake. Silas, meanwhile, executed his own careful manipulations throughout the mansion. He adjusted the maintenance logs to create a pattern of unexplainable disturbances. The elevator would stop between floors, trapping Victor for several minutes before mysteriously starting again. Lights in the east wing would flicker and dim during his late-night walks. The security system would trigger without cause, always when Victor was alone. Each incident was minor enough to be explained away by technical issues, but together they formed a web of uncertainty that kept Victor constantly on edge. In the midst of this psychological siege, Nia's curiosity led her down a dark path. The crumpled receipt had sparked something in her mind, a question she couldn't shake. Late one night, she sat in her room, the blue light of her laptop illuminating her face as she typed 1999 bridge incident into various search engines. After hours of searching through archived news sites and public records, she found it, a police report from 2 decades ago, heavily redacted but still readable in parts. The location matched perfectly with the spot where her father still went fishing every summer, a detail that made her stomach turn. The report mentioned a suspected child drowning, possibly 2 victims, but most of the crucial details were blacked out. What remained was a description of small footprints in the mud near the riverbank and a witness statement from a local who reported hearing screams during a thunderstorm. As Nia stared at the document, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed began to shift into place. Her father's annual fishing trips to that specific spot, his insistence on going alone, the way he would return quiet and withdrawn, it all took on a sinister new meaning. The psychological pressure finally reached a breaking point at midnight when Victor's trembling fingers dialed Callum's number. His voice cracked with desperation as he spoke. "Someone's trying to destroy me," he whispered into the phone, huddled in his dark study. "My own board is turning against me. My staff is conspiring with outsiders. Even my own home isn't safe anymore. They're all part of it. They must be." Callum's response came smooth and measured, like a knife wrapped in silk. "What if it's you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Victor's breath caught in his throat as memories he'd buried long ago threatened to surface, the weight of small bodies in his arms, the sound of rain on a steel bridge, the splash that had haunted his dreams for 20 years. The Sunday morning sun filtered through the mansion's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Silas moved silently through the guest wing, his footsteps masked by years of practice. He knew Nia's habits well. This was where she retreated when she wanted to escape her father's suffocating presence, seeking solitude among the unused rooms and dusty antiques. With practiced precision, he placed a manila envelope on the antique writing desk near the window. The envelope was weathered, its edges deliberately worn to suggest age, with "Security Backup 1999" written in faded black marker. He positioned it at an angle that would catch the morning light, making it impossible to miss. Silas checked his watch, 9:15 a.m. Right on schedule. Nia would arrive soon, seeking her usual Sunday morning sanctuary. He slipped away like a ghost, leaving no trace of his presence. Less than 10 minutes later, Nia entered the guest wing, her laptop tucked under her arm. She paused when she spotted the envelope, her curiosity immediately piqued. The teenager approached cautiously, running her fingers over the rough paper before carefully breaking the seal. Inside, she found a USB drive and several printed stills from what appeared to be security footage. The images were grainy and distorted but clear enough to make out a familiar figure, her father, 20 years younger, on what looked like a bridge. With trembling hands, Nia inserted the drive into her laptop. The video began to play, its timestamp reading 23:47, September 15, 1999. Through the static and rain-warped footage, she watched her father's younger self emerge from a car, dragging two small, struggling forms across the bridge. Her breath caught as she recognized the bridge, the same one from the police report she'd found. The footage was dark and distorted, but there was no mistaking what she was seeing, her father, usually so controlled and proper, roughly handling two terrified toddlers. The video cut just as Victor lifted the children toward the railing. Nia sat frozen, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Hours later, she found her mother in the conservatory, tending to her prized orchids. Renee looked up as Nia entered, immediately noting her daughter's red-rimmed eyes and pale complexion. "Nia, what's wrong, sweetheart?" Renee set down her watering can, concern etching lines around her eyes. "Mom," Nia's voice cracked, "I need to ask you something about 1999. About two boys." The color drained from Renee's face. She stumbled backward, catching herself on the edge of a planter. "Where did you? How did you? Who were they, Mom?" Nia pressed, her voice stronger now. "The twins. What happened to them?" Renee collapsed onto a nearby chair, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. They were supposed to have died during childbirth. That's what Victor told me. He said it was a mistake, a brief affair, but the babies hadn't survived." Her voice broke. "I believed him. I never asked questions. He was so insistent that we never speak of it. But they didn't die at birth, did they?" Nia's words hung in the air like poison. Renee could only shake her head, tears falling freely now. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know." Across town, in Victor's corporate headquarters, Callum was executing another carefully planned move. He approached Marcus Chen, a mid-level manager known for his loose lips and ambition, in the break room. "Have you noticed anything off about Mr. Gray lately?" Callum asked quietly, making sure others were within earshot but not too close. Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" Callum pulled out his phone, showing carefully selected surveillance clips of Victor's recent outbursts. He fired Sandra after 20 years over missing cufflinks that were in his pocket. He's been talking to himself in his office, and these emails. He displayed a series of forged messages showing increasingly erratic behavior. Marcus's eyes widened. "This is serious. The board should know." "They already do," Callum interrupted smoothly. "They've placed him under observation. But keep this quiet, okay? We don't want to cause a panic." By the end of the day, whispers of Victor's mental state had spread through every department. The board members began receiving concerned calls from various managers, all reporting similar stories of unstable behavior. In Dr. Maeve's office, the pressure continued to mount. Victor sat rigid in his usual chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. "You've mentioned dreams about water," Dr. Maeve said softly. "About rain and bridges. Why do you think these images haunt you, Victor?" "Stop," he whispered. "Who were the boys, Victor?" Her voice was gentle but insistent. "What happened that night?" Victor's facade finally cracked. 20 years of carefully constructed walls came crashing down as he doubled over, his body racked with sobs. "I didn't mean to," he choked out. "I had no choice. They would have ruined everything, my reputation, my future. I had no choice." Dr. Maeve watched him break, her sharp eyes recording every detail of his confession. She didn't push further, she didn't need to. The seed had cracked open, and the truth was beginning to sprout. In a small room filled with monitors, Silas watched multiple feeds simultaneously. His main focus was on Nia's laptop screen, where she had paused the footage at the moment Victor reached the bridge railing. Her face was illuminated by the screen's blue glow as she stared at the frozen image of her father and two small boys. Who were they? She whispered to the darkness, unaware that Silas could hear every word through the carefully placed microphones. A small smile crossed Silas's face as he watched her. Everything was falling into place. The truth was finally emerging from the depths where it had been buried for so long. It was time. The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows as Victor sat at his massive oak dining table, absently stirring his coffee. His tablet lay beside his untouched breakfast of poached eggs and fresh fruit. A sharp buzz from the device made him flinch, coffee sloshing over the rim of his cup. The notification banner stretched across the screen. Breaking news: whistleblower reveals CEO Victor Gray's connection to offshore money laundering and 1999 disappearance file. Victor's hand trembled as he tapped the alert. His face drained of color as he scrolled through the article, each word hitting him like a physical blow. Photos, documents, bank statements. All laid bare for the world to see. And there, buried in the middle of the exposé, was a grainy image of a bridge on a rainy night. His phone began ringing incessantly, board members, lawyers, PR teams, all demanding answers. But before he could respond to any of them, his CFO's resignation letter landed in his inbox. The message was brief but devastating. Due to ethical conflicts that have recently come to light, I must tender my immediate resignation. Victor barely had time to process this when Nia burst into the dining room, her laptop clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Renee followed close behind, her usual composed demeanor cracking. What is this? Nia's voice shook as she opened her laptop, turning it to face her father. The security footage began to play, dark and grainy but unmistakable. Victor watched himself drag two small figures across the bridge. It's nothing, Victor said automatically, his voice hollow. A fabrication. Someone trying to destroy me. Stop lying. Nia slammed her hand on the table. I found the police report. I found everything. Renee stepped forward, her face ashen. Victor, please, tell me this isn't real. Tell me you didn't. Her voice broke. They're dead. Victor suddenly screamed, surging to his feet. His coffee cup crashed to the floor, shattering. They're dead. They're dead. They're dead. His voice echoed through the mansion's halls, bouncing off marble and glass. In his hidden monitoring room, Silas watched the scene unfold across multiple screens. His expression remained neutral, but his hands clenched slightly as he observed his father's breakdown. Through the high-definition cameras, he could see every twitch, every bead of sweat on Victor's face as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. Across town, in the corporate headquarters, Callum moved with precise efficiency. His fingers flew across his keyboard as he implemented the crisis protocols he had designed months ago. With each keystroke, Victor's access to company systems was quietly revoked, authority redirecting through alternative channels that Callum controlled. Mr. Darren, a nervous IT technician appeared at his door. The board is asking about Mr. Gray's credentials being suspended. Standard crisis protocol, Callum replied smoothly, not looking up from his screen. We have to protect the company's assets during any potential investigation. I have the authorization forms right here. He held up a folder of perfectly forged documents. Meanwhile, Dr. Maeve sat in her office, reviewing selected clips from Victor's therapy sessions. Her face remained impassive as she compiled the most damning moments, Victor's confused ramblings about the river, his admissions of guilt, his desperate attempts to justify his actions. Something went wrong with the boys, Victor's voice played through her headphones. I never meant. I had to protect everything I'd built. She packaged the clips carefully, adding her professional analysis, and sent them to the legal team that had been quietly assembled months ago. The scene outside the gray mansion grew increasingly chaotic as news vans and reporters gathered at the gates. Camera flashes lit up the evening like lightning as Victor's car approached. Security tried to clear a path, but journalists pressed forward, shouting questions. "Mr. Gray, did you attempt to murder your illegitimate sons? What happened on the bridge that night? Where did the money really come from?" Victor's control finally snapped. As one reporter thrust a microphone toward him, he lashed out, his fist connecting with the young man's jaw. The crowd gasped. Cameras whirred. The moment of violence was captured from a dozen angles, immediately broadcasting across every major network. Inside the mansion, Nia watched the footage play on repeat on her laptop, each viewing making her feel sicker. Renee sat beside her, silent tears rolling down her cheeks as she stared at the stranger her husband had become. The board called an emergency meeting. Within hours, they released a statement. Due to recent events and concerns about personal conduct, Victor Gray will be taking an immediate leave of absence from his position as CEO. That night, the corporate offices stood empty and dark, except for one window high above the city. Callum sat at his desk, illuminated by the blue glow of his monitor. Before him lay the final piece of their long game, comprehensive documentation of every illegal transaction, every hidden account, every instance of fraud and manipulation spanning 2 decades. His finger hovered over the send button. In the attached folders, evidence for the SEC detailing securities fraud, documentation for the FBI revealing money laundering operations, and detailed financial records for the IRS exposing years of tax evasion. Callum thought of Lars, teaching them chess on that old porch. Patience, he'd always said. The final move should be decisive. With a click, the files were sent. The sound of the email whooshing away seemed to echo in the empty office, a digital signal that would trigger an avalanche of consequences by morning. Through the mansion's cameras, Silas watched Victor pace in his study, phone pressed to his ear as he desperately called in favors, tried to maintain control. But the desperate man on the screen was no longer the monster from their nightmares. He was just a man, falling apart as his lies unraveled. The night grew deeper, and the storm they'd spent 18 years preparing finally broke over the Gray family empire. Truth, like water, would find its way to the surface, no matter how deep it was buried. The morning sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows but brought no warmth to the cold atmosphere inside. Victor stood at his study window, his reflection a ghost against the glass. 3 days of stubble darkened his jaw, and his bloodshot eyes darted between the locked gates and the crowd of reporters still camped outside. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, having slept in it on his office couch. Down the hall, silence filled the spaces where family life used to be. Renee moved through the house like a shadow, averting her eyes whenever she passed near Victor's study. She hadn't spoken a word to him since the footage revelation. Her silence was more damning than any accusation. Their daughter's empty room echoed with absence. Nia had packed a bag the night before, saying she needed space to think. She was staying at her friend Emma's apartment across town. Victor's phone buzzed. Callum's name flashed on the screen. "Sir," Callum's voice crackled with urgency, "you need to turn on the news now." Victor fumbled for the remote, his hands shaking as he pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, showing live helicopter footage of the corporate headquarters. Dark vehicles surrounded the building. Men in suits and windbreakers marked FBI and SEC streamed through the front doors. "What's happening?" Victor's voice cracked. "They're seizing everything," Callum said, his tone carefully measured with artificial panic. "Sir, they've been watching you for years, building a case. The whistleblower just gave them the final pieces they needed." Victor collapsed into his leather chair, sweat beading on his forehead. "The accounts," he whispered. "We need to move the money now." "I've already started the emergency protocols," Callum replied. "Give me your authorization code for the Cayman transfers." Victor rattled off a string of numbers, his voice trembling. Move everything to the private account we discussed. All of it. Working on it now, sir. The sound of rapid typing came through the phone. Done. The funds are being transferred. What Victor couldn't see was Callum's calm smile as he redirected the massive sum into a carefully structured charitable foundation. The paperwork listed Nia Gray as the sole trustee, with ironclad legal protections that would keep the money out of Victor's reach forever. Across town, in the mansion's east wing, Silas was completing his final task. Dressed in his janitor's uniform, he accepted his termination notice along with dozens of other staff members, casualties of the company's sudden crisis. But before turning in his keys, he made one last trip to Nia's room. The package he left was simple, a manila envelope placed on her pillow. Inside, he tucked a handwritten letter and a collection of photographs. Images Lars had taken of the twins growing up, birthday celebrations with makeshift cakes, chess matches on the porch, two boys growing into men, always together, always planning. Later that afternoon, Nia returned home briefly to collect more clothes. The house felt foreign now, tainted by secrets and lies. She paused at her bedroom door, spotting the envelope immediately. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The photos spilled onto her bed, two boys, so young, with familiar eyes, her half-brothers. The truth of their existence hit her again, fresh and raw. She unfolded the letter, reading the careful handwriting, "You were the only innocent. He took our lives. We took his." Nia pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Everything clicked into place, the mysterious financial advisor, the quiet janitor who seemed to fade into the background. They had been there all along, orchestrating their father's downfall from within. As evening approached, Nia found herself driving to the bridge, the same bridge from the footage, though it looked different in the dying light. She parked her car and walked to the middle, her steps slow and deliberate. The metal railing was cold under her fingers as she sat, legs dangling over the edge, where the security camera had cut off all those years ago. The photograph was creased now from being held so tightly. Two young boys smiled up at her, brothers she never knew she had, family that had been stolen from her before she was even born. A tear rolled down her cheek and fell, disappearing into the dark water below. In the growing shadows of dusk, Silas stood among the trees at the far end of the bridge. He watched his half-sister mourn for the family she never had, for the truth that had shattered her world. His face remained impassive, but his eyes held a depth of understanding and something close to regret, not for Victor's destruction, but for the pain it caused her. After a long moment, Silas turned away from the bridge and walked into the gathering darkness, leaving Nia to her solitude and her grief. The rain pelted against the windows of City Hall as Victor Gray stumbled down the marble steps, his tie askew and his expensive suit soaked through. His eyes were wild, darting between invisible threats as reporters thrust microphones toward his face. "Mr. Gray, can you comment on the federal investigation? What about the offshore accounts? Sir, is it true you're stepping down as CEO?" But Victor wasn't hearing their questions. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a loop of memory and madness. The sound of rushing water filled his ears, drowning out everything else. "The river boys," he shouted suddenly, causing the reporters to step back. "They came back. Don't you see? They're everywhere." His hands clawed at the air, trying to grab something only he could see. Security guards moved forward, but Victor spun away from them, his voice rising to a shriek. "My own advisor, the janitor, they were there all along." Spittle flew from his lips as he jabbed his finger at the crowd. "Betrayal. They're trying to erase me." Two police officers approached cautiously, hands raised in a calming gesture. Victor's eyes rolled wildly in their sockets as he backed against a pillar. "The bridge, the water. I can hear it. Always hear it." Within minutes, paramedics arrived with a stretcher. Victor fought as they tried to help him, screaming about revenge and rivers until the sedative took hold. The last thing he saw before consciousness faded was a sea of phones recording his breakdown, broadcasting his fall from grace to the world. 3 days later, Victor sat in a stark white room at the Oakwood Heights Psychiatric Facility, a high-security institution known for its discretion with wealthy patients. The window was reinforced glass, the furniture bolted down. He wore soft cotton clothes instead of his tailored suits, and his usual commanding presence had shrunk into something small and haunted. The hallucination started on the first night. Wet footprints appeared on the floor, tiny, bare feet tracking water across the linoleum. They would fade when he blinked, only to reappear somewhere else. Sometimes, he heard children laughing, the sound echoing from the corners of his room. But worst was the constant sound of rushing water, as if a river ran through the walls. Dr. Maeve visited him on the 4th day. She sat in the chair across from him, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. Victor stared at her with bloodshot eyes. "The medication isn't working," he whispered. "I can still hear them, the water." Dr. Maeve simply watched him, her silence drawing out his desperation. "You have to help me," he pleaded. "Make it stop. Make them go away." She tilted her head slightly, studying him like a curious specimen. "You remember now," she said, her voice soft but firm. Those 3 words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Then she stood and left, her heels clicking down the hallway, leaving Victor alone with his ghosts. While Victor unraveled in isolation, Callum methodically dismantled the last pieces of his financial empire. In his temporary office, he worked through the night, orchestrating the sale of Victor's remaining shell companies. Each transaction was precise, untraceable, routing to unrelated buyers across different continents. Numbers flowed across his screen as he erased years of careful construction, reducing Victor's hidden wealth to nothing. The last transfer completed at dawn. Callum sat back in his chair, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold. He thought about chess matches on Lars's porch, about learning to think 10 moves ahead. A small smile touched his lips as he cleared his browser history, removed his encryption software, and wiped the computer's hard drive. By noon, Calderon would cease to exist. Miles away, on a rocky stretch of coastline, Silas stood before a simple granite marker. Lars's grave overlooked the ocean, where they had trained as boys, learning to endure cold water and rough waves. The old man had taught them that nature was both teacher and weapon. It was fitting that he rested here, where land met sea. Silas lit one of Lars's favorite cigars, cupping his hand against the salt breeze. The smoke mingled with the ocean mist as he remembered early morning runs on this beach, Lars pushing them to be faster, stronger, smarter, teaching them that patience was deadlier than rage. The wind caught the cigar's ashes as Silas tapped it, carrying the gray flakes out over the water. He watched them disappear, thinking about all the mornings Lars had stood here with them, plotting their return to the world that had tried to drown them. Meanwhile, in a downtown office, a private investigator named Sarachan rubbed her tired eyes. Nia Gray had hired her to trace Calderon and Sean Wells, but after weeks of searching, she had nothing. Their papers were perfect but led nowhere. Their backgrounds were detailed but disappeared under scrutiny. Even their social media presence had vanished, leaving only broken links and deleted accounts. "It's like they were ghosts," she told Nia during their final meeting. "They existed just long enough to get close to your father, then evaporated. Whoever they really were, they knew exactly how to disappear." Nia nodded, unsurprised. She had expected this outcome, had somehow known her brothers wouldn't leave a trail. Part of her was glad, their revenge was complete, but they had spared her the burden of knowing where to find them. Back at Oakwood Heights, Victor sat in his final therapy session, staring at the blank white wall. The hallucinations had faded with time, but understanding had taken their place, a clarity worse than any vision. "They didn't want me dead," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. "They wanted me forgotten." The truth of it settled over him like a shroud. His wealth was gone, his reputation destroyed, his family shattered. The boys he had tried to erase had succeeded in erasing him instead. Dr. Maeve stood silently, gathering her notebook. She paused at the door, looking back at the hollow shell of the man who had once commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. Now he was just another patient, lost in the sterile maze of institutional corridors, reduced to muttering about rivers and revenge. Without a word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps fading like the last echoes of Victor Gray's former life. 1 year later, an unmarked envelope arrived at Nia's apartment. Inside, she found a simple brass key with a tag bearing only numbers, 2317. No name, no bank, no return address, just cold metal against her palm, heavy with unspoken meaning. It took her 3 days to track down the right bank. The manager led her to a private viewing room, his movements precise and formal as he unlocked the safety deposit box. "Take your time," he said, closing the door behind him. Nia's hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside lay 3 items, arranged with careful precision: a weathered wooden chessboard, its squares darkened by years of use, a tarnished military medal, its ribbon faded but intact, and a cream-colored envelope containing a single sheet of paper. She touched the chessboard first, running her fingers along the grooves where countless pieces had slid across its surface. The wood held memories of strategy and patience, of lessons learned in silence. She could almost see phantom hands moving pieces in the soft light of the viewing room. The medal drew her attention next. It was heavy, marked with ops scops and a date from decades ago. She recognized it from her research. A special operations unit, most of its records still classified. Lars's medal, she realized, the man who had saved her brothers and taught them how to save themselves. Finally, she opened the letter. The handwriting was neat, controlled, but held a hint of emotion in its careful strokes. Revenge is not about ending someone. It's about making them live with what they did. Nia sat back, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. These weren't just objects, they were a message, a final piece of the story. Her brothers weren't asking for connection or forgiveness. They were showing her why. Revenge wasn't about death or destruction. It was about justice, about forcing someone to face their own truth. In the months that followed, Nia channeled her inheritance, the money Callum had quietly rerouted from Victor's accounts, into something meaningful. She established the Riverbridge Foundation, a scholarship program for children who had survived trauma or abuse. The foundation's logo featured 2 small handprints, barely visible unless you knew to look for them. When reporters asked about the name, Nia developed a careful way of speaking about it. "Some people think ghosts are about haunting," she would say, her voice steady and clear. "But sometimes, they're about saving others from growing up blind to truth and justice." She never named her brothers directly, never claimed to know their whereabouts. But in every interview, she honored their story without exposing it. "The foundation exists because someone showed me that the worst moments don't have to define us. They can inspire us to protect others from the same pain." Meanwhile, on a quiet stretch of coastline far from the city's reach, Callum and Silas built a different kind of life. They chose a small fishing village where people minded their own business, where questions about the past were considered impolite. Under new identities, crafted with the same precision they'd used to dismantle Victor's empire, they established a boutique consulting firm. Their office occupied the top floor of an old lighthouse keeper's house, overlooking the ocean. They took on select clients, mostly small businesses needing strategic guidance. Their reputation grew slowly, naturally, the quiet brothers who could solve any problem, who saw 10 moves ahead but never drew attention to themselves. They didn't discuss Victor anymore. His name had faded like old ink, replaced by conversations about client projects and local fishing conditions. Their revenge had been executed with the precision Lars taught them, not to destroy, but to reshape reality itself. One morning, Callum walked along the beach during his usual dawn routine. The tide was pulling back, leaving the sand smooth and dark. He stopped when he saw marks in the wet surface, not random patterns, but deliberate lines scratched with a driftwood stick. Pawn to e4. He looked up, scanning the misty shoreline. Silas stood near the water's edge, hands in his pockets, a slight smile visible even at this distance. He nodded once, the gesture containing years of shared understanding. That evening, they sat on their weathered porch, the old wooden chessboard between them. It wasn't Lars's board, that one rested safely in Nia's possession, but it carried the same spirit. Salt air swirled around them as Callum reached for a white pawn. Silas lit one of his cigars, the same brand Lars had favored. The smoke mingled with the ocean breeze, carrying memories of other games, other lessons. Behind them, waves crashed against the shore in a steady rhythm, reminiscent of moving water but lacking the dark undertones of their past. The river that had shaped their lives lay hundreds of miles away, its waters long since merged with the vast ocean before them. But like all rivers, it had carved its path, changed its landscape, and flowed inevitably towards something larger than itself. The brothers had followed its example, reshaping, changing, and finally finding peace in the endless horizon where water met sky. Callum's hand hovered over the pawn, the first move of a new game waiting to be made. The piece cast a long shadow in the setting sun, like a marker between past and present. Around them, the village settled into evening routines, fishing boats returning to harbor, children being called home for dinner, seabirds making final sweeps over the water. The moment held all the weight of their journey, from the bridge to Lars's cabin, from careful planning to precise execution, from revenge to resolution. But now, that weight was simply part of the foundation they'd built, as solid as the lighthouse behind them. Silas tapped his cigar against the ashtray, watching the orange sun sink toward the water. The ocean before them was calm, reflecting golden light like a mirror. It was nothing like the turbulent river of their childhood. Yet it carried the same lesson Lars had taught them: water shapes everything it touches, not through force, but through persistence and patience. The chessboard waited between them, its squares holding infinite possibilities. No revenge, no justice, no past to avenge, just two brothers, an old game, and the endless sound of waves marking time like the ticking of Lars's ancient chess clock. If you enjoyed the story of Callum and Silas, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.